PhD student from the University of Portsmouth, and I'll just talk about one of the studies in my thesis in which we looked at the effect of names and image variability on prospective person memory. When I show you this picture, most of you probably already know who she is, but just in case, this is Madeleine McCann, and she went missing in 2007 in Portugal. And this is a perfect example of how prospective person memory works in real life. So when she went missing, the police and her family and a lot of the news outlets distributed a lot of photographs of her, asking the public to be on the lookout for her and to contact the authorities if they have any information. So in general, prospective person memory is remembering to perform an intended action, such as calling the authorities, when you encounter a particular cue, such as seeing a person, in this case, Madeleine, during your everyday activities. And as you can imagine, this is a very hard task, and Lampinen and Moore have already discussed a theoretical account of how prospective person memory works, in which they describe several preconditions, and each of these preconditions happen on a case-by-case basis with a certain probability, but all of them have to be met for them to result in a successful recovery. So encountering the alert and attending to the alert in the case of Madeleine, because it was a very high-profile case and it's probably still the most famous missing person case, a lot of the public encountered the alert and they had to attend to the alert because it was all over the news. Then encountering the missing person, it's something we have absolutely no control over, and that's probably the main step where things go wrong. Then attending to the missing person, so something in the context or in the environment had to draw attention to their face, and then the information needs to be, there needs to be enough of a match between the information that you encoded during the in the alert with the information when you actually encounter the missing person for that to spark a reminding, and then you have to be confident enough to take action and to call the police. Just to simplify this a little bit, in our experiments, we focus on three main stages. The first one is learning the face. So all of our participants are asked to learn previously unfamiliar faces. And then all of our participants encounter the person. And then we look at how many of them take action in the right circumstances. So basically, we look at the effect of what we put in an appeal on the success of prospective person memory. And this leads me to my question. So what information should we include in a missing person appeal? And most appeals include information such as a photograph, their name, where they went missing, and so on. So our focus, firstly, was on photographs and what types of photographs should we include. Sweeney and Lampinen have already shown that including 3 photographs rather than just 1 photograph increased the number of correct identifications and also slightly increased the number of incorrect identifications. However, they used 3 photographs in just 1 appeal, so presented simultaneously, and all of the participants observed 1 appeal of 1 particular missing person. What can happen in real life, though, is that after you first learn the face of a missing person, but before you actually encounter them, you might come across other missing person appeals of other people, or other missing person appeals of the same person but using a different image, or just other faces in general. For example, in the case of Madeleine, this was the picture that was distributed the next morning after she went missing in the area where she went missing in Portugal. And then later on in the investigation, this was the picture that was distributed, and until this day is the most highly distributed picture of her because it presents very distinctive features of her eyes. Later on, they started using this photograph because it was a photograph taken the day when she was missing, so the most accurate appearance of her, let's say. And then because this is a very long-term case of a missing person, they've started to create progressed images. So they've started sharing new images of how Madeleine would look like later on. And as you can imagine, the public would, in between different presentations of Madeleine, the public might encounter other missing person appeals or just learn new faces. And we call this a distributed presentation. So the images of Madeleine are distributed presented with other faces in between them. And this might be very hard because if you don't know exactly who is in those pictures, it might be very hard for you to connect them all together and present one stable representation of Madeleine. For example, if I show all of these pictures to my mom, she probably would not really understand who it is unless I tell her, oh, it's that little girl who went missing in Portugal. and then all it would make sense for her. And one way of helping our participants or the public connect all of these images into one representation rather than different ones for each picture is to tag along with each of her pictures. We can just share her name as well. So the first variable that we were interested in our study is when we use a distributed presentation, will names associated with very different pictures help them? Because it will help participants recognize that it's the same person, and that's how they just look in a different context rather than think that is another person and then make incorrect identifications. Then we were also interested in the variability of the pictures because although this was a very, very highly advertised case, in most missing person appeals, they just create one missing person appeal in the beginning and then it gets redistributed over time, but with the same image. So we were interested to see how important is the variability in these cases, very long-term cases in which the distributed presentation might actually work better with the low variability of images, which are a lot easier to connect because background information. So the public might just realize that it's the same person even without names. So our hypothesis was that when high variability images are going to be used, including names will improve performance, but when low variability images are used, including names might not act as a tag because they are not needed. So these are some examples of high variability images that we've used. So we've used 3 photographs per target from 3 different events. And for low variability, we used 3 photographs per target, but from the same event. And our second manipulation was that all of the targets were presented with or without names. This was a mixed design and we tested 242 participants. Just to talk you through the procedure now, participants were told to simulate a prospective person memory task. Participants were told to pretend that they are a security guard at the entrance of a nightclub. And their main task was to decide who is allowed to go in and who's not allowed to go in based on the age. And the age limit was 25. So they had to decide if they're above 25 or not. However, they were told that there are a number of banned individuals who are not allowed to go in regardless of their age. So before the testing phase began, they all had an opportunity to get familiarized with the banned individuals. So in the familiarization phase, we presented 4 targets with 3 pictures each, so 12 images in total in a distributed manner. And then during the testing phase, they've seen 20 images one at a time, and they had to decide if they're allowed to go in or not, and also if they're banned or not. These are some examples of our stimuli. So you can see in the top left corner, the image number 1 and image number 4 presents the same individual, and those are low variability images because you can see based on the background and how he is dressed that it's obviously the same person. But when you look to the right and you see high variability images, on picture number 4, is taken from a different context. So although it is the same person, some participants might not realize that they present the same target. But then a bit lower, you see that we also attached a name to the photograph. And because the name is the same, participants might think, oh, this is the same person, just in a different context. And then during the testing phase, we presented all images without names. And for the targets, we presented new images. So regardless of in which condition the participants were, there were always new images during testing phase. Just some results. So first we looked at the number of correct identifications and incorrect identifications, and we found a main effect of variability. So using high variability images resulted in significantly more correct identifications than using low variability images. And also including names also increased the number of correct identifications. When we look at the false alarms, the numbers are very low. However, when high variability images were used, including a name decreased the number of false alarms, which kind of makes sense from what I just explained, because when no names are presented, they might overestimate the number of targets that they see. But when names are presented, they know that there are just 4 targets because there are only 4 names. However, we were mostly interested in discriminability and response bias measures because in missing person cases, the police, for example, in the case of Madeleine, the police got a lot of sightings and they probably sometimes didn't have the resources to check them all. So we would want to use an appeal that already sorts through them in a way. So when we look at discriminability, we found a significant main effect of variability. So again, using high variability improved discriminability. And there was also a main effect of names. So including names helped improve discriminability in both variability conditions. So, and there was no interaction. So this is not according to our hypothesis. It seems that names improve performance even when low variability images are used, which suggests that individuation is probably not the only mechanism behind the effect of names. And when we look at response bias, the only significant effect was that using high variability images resulted in a lower response bias, which means significantly more sightings regardless of accuracy. If you think back to the number of hits and false alarms, this makes sense just because this is explained by an increase in number of hits rather than an increase in number of false alarms. So overall, presenting high variability images improve discriminability, and including names also increase discriminability. I should also say that the effect of names is significantly, well, it is larger than the effect of the effect of variability is larger than the effect of names, sorry. And what we are very interested in is to now, in the future, to detangle between different mechanisms between the effect of names, because our studies seem to support that individuation is probably not the only effect, because they wouldn't be needed when low variability images are used. Schwartz and Jovel suggest that names result in deeper encoding of that person rather than just that face. However, we don't know how our participants, maybe our participants thought that it was harder than we thought to connect the low variability images, or maybe it was not as hard as we thought to connect the high variability images. So future studies can attempt to probably present the images simultaneously, which ensures that they will definitely not need a name to be connected. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing your suggestions. That's it. If you have any questions. I have some discussion questions afterwards, if not. I can't hear anyone, so.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
This is Dawn Weatherford. First off, Stefana, that was excellent. Very well done. Super enjoyable. My question is in regards to how you're defining high variability. So when I looked at those images, they seem to be high variability with respect to context, but still relatively low variability with respect to age, right? So for instance, Madeline is so young, you're not going to have representative images of her that are younger than when she went missing. And so that doesn't necessarily follow into like the real world example that you used. However, many of those individuals, if they had to make the decision about whether or not they were 25, they were adults, right? So what are your predictions about something that perhaps you could coin highest variability, wherein not just the context alters, but so too does a little bit more in terms of age and things that also represent within-person variability? Do you think that would be more confusing, or do you think that that would actually still kind of double down and maybe impact and benefit the outcomes even more strongly?
So we don't have any information about the variability. We did try to use, for example, photographs with hair up, hair down, different facial hair. But yeah, I do think that if, for example, in the case of Madeline, for example, using one original photograph when she was 3, and then using the progressed image when she was 6, and then using another progressed image when she was 11, if it is over a very long period of time, maybe the public gets accustomed and they're like, yeah, of course she doesn't look like she was 3. But if you just show 3 very different photographs in a short period of time and they said, oh, this is from when he was a teenager, the public might not even pay attention, because they in a way assume that that's definitely not how they're going to look when they get encountered. I'm not sure if that answers your question. But also about age, we ran a norming study to make sure that our targets were of different ages in comparison to 25. And what we found was that 5 of our targets looked definitely younger than 25, and 5 of them looked definitely older than 25, and 6 of them around 25. And then if you look at how many participants correctly identify them, there wasn't any difference depending on age.
Yeah, I was just thinking more about within a given target. So a target that is 25 now, you could have one when they're 20, but you couldn't do that with Madeline. But so you're thinking that, so your answer is that you think the public would dismiss the younger photos and not treat them as representative. Okay.
Depending on how different they are as well.
Thank you.
So I'd just like to say that the final session of today has been postponed by 10 minutes. So it should be starting shortly. If anybody wanted to go to the Inside the Psychologist's lab session, it's going to be starting at 22:05. Now it's been pushed back because of this session running over. However, if obviously our speakers are okay with it, if anybody would like to just keep this link open just for a moment and ask any final questions, so long as obviously our speakers are okay with just hanging on just for a moment. Obviously, if anybody had any final questions for Stefana as well, because I don't want to stop people from asking their questions. But just before that, I would like to say thank you so much to each of our 4 speakers. I'm sure everybody would agree with me. Those have been some really fascinating talks, and wonderful to hear them from the comfort of our own home during all of this. So thank you so much for that. So have we got any other questions for Stefana? Can't actually see any raised hands or any more questions coming through in the chat. So as I said, if anybody would like to make their way into the final session inside the Psychologist's lab, or if you want to stick around and ask any questions, by all means, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you to our speakers. That was really interesting and a really great session. Yes, if you just want to make your way to the next session when you're ready. Thank you so much, guys.